What's the most extreme situation in which you've broken the rules? The rule was, no causing a scene in public. Me and my brother were kids at the time. I was 7 and he was 5. We were allowed a rare treat at the restaurant we were eating dinner at, dessert. We both got the same thing, a chocolate sundae. They swore up and down that there were no nuts in it. My brother was and is severely allergic to nuts. I found a nut in mine and told my brother not to eat any more of his. My parents didn't believe me and told me to knock it off, let him eat. So I started screaming, crying, yelling and carrying on, and threw my ice cream down on the floor. There were nuts in it. My parents saw. They took my brother's ice cream away quickly to check his, and yep, full of walnuts. They went from being furious with me for throwing the tantrum of a century to shock. I wasn't making up stories, I was trying to save my brother's life. Performed the lab test Cedo faster version that only takes an hour instead of 4 hours. Wasn't supposed to do that, because we were almost out of material, and it was only for emergencies when I was informed that the patient does not get a room until the test is done and the patient is currently intubated in the middle of the hallway. Terry Pratchett said it best, look, that's why there are rules, you know. So you think before you break them. Not sure about extreme, but probably the dumbest. I cussed out a teacher at a strict young ladies boarding school in the late 80s during one of my rebellious streaks. Yeah, bad idea. As for punishment? The school had a cow barn with 12 cows, I believe, for an agricultural education course. If you acted up in class, you'd get detention, lines, the paddle, but the highest on the disciplinary ladder was dairy do die. Yes, they actually called it that. You'd be sent to the cow barn at 5:30 p.m., about 30 to 60 minutes after the ag students had finished cleaning, and would be made to clean the barn of manure with bare hands, gloves, chevalet strictly forbidden, and the wheelbarrow stayed outside of each stall. Honestly, I didn't take it as seriously as maybe I should have. I figured it's 12 cows and the barn had just been cleaned half an hour ago. How bad could it be? Answer: very, very bad. I did not make that mistake again. My friend dared me to take something from the store when we were kids. I ended up returning it out of guilt the next day and the people just laughed it off. I never stole again. I was told by my manager at Target to stop this lady who was shoplifting with her kids until security came to help. I politely asked her to please see her receipt and just tried to buy time. She quickly rushed me and started punching me in the face while her 2 little kids were screaming and crying. By instinct, I grabbed her hair and tried to pull her down to the ground with me. It turns out it was a weave and I completely ripped it off. She quickly ran off after that, leaving her weave there. They found her later and charged her with a misdemeanor for assault and shoplifting. However, I was fired because she made a complaint against me saying I was racist and purposely embarrassed her in front of her kids by pulling off her weave. Target fired me that following week for engaging with a shoplifter and racial profiling discrimination, even though it was my manager that told me to stop her. Of course, my manager denied everything and later told me she was sorry, but she needed to keep her job. I was honestly shocked, but so upset by that situation that I've never stepped foot into a Target ever again. I filled out an official HR self-evaluation as if I was a lunatic. I wrote that I shaved half my head on a dare and ate pavement chunks while dressed as a pigeon. I also stole shopping carts to build forts and proposed to all of the customers. I signed my name and handed it in. HR didn't respond. I got a full raise that year. I was stuck in non-moving bumper-to-bumper traffic on a highway entry ramp. It was a terrible thunderstorm, and I realized I had made a horrible mistake not taking the local roads home because I was already committed to the highway, which was extremely backed up. Then the tornado sirens started going off, and I did not want to be a sitting duck in traffic, so I U-turned out of there, going the wrong way on the entry ramp. The drive home on local roads was the scariest moment of my life, but felt less daunting than not moving. It was the first and only time I broke a traffic law, and I don't regret it. Was working at the local market a few years ago. While scanning a guy's items, he just approached and whispered, "I have a knife in my pocket. How about you just put the money in that bag too and we can say our goodbyes?" A rough translation, I tried my best. I stood there frozen and thought of what I should do, then looked at the people behind him. Couldn't risk getting someone else hurt, so I just gave him the money and let him go. So, I stood there scared shitless, calling the manager. Turns out I broke a rule because what I should have done is turn the alarm on and warn everybody. My paycheck was cut for the stolen amount because I decided to not risk lives over mere 500. Needless to say, quit on the spot. I went to a semi-boarding high school. About 10 of students boarded, and new dorms were constructed. While I was there, we had a big meeting, and the principal said no students of the opposite sex in your dorm room. We don't want anyone having sex. A bit paraphrased, one of the students stood up and said, "What about the gay kids? They get to have sex." So for about a month, The rule was no students of the opposite or same sex in your dorm room, with the exception of your roommate. I was driving home one night after seeing a musical at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia. This must have been right before GPS. I lived in the northern suburbs. I decided to take Broad Street home because I knew where I'd end up if I went this way. There was barely any traffic. I reached a bad section of the city. I was seeing lots of unsavory people hanging out on the street corners, and this was during a period of unusually high gang violence. I decided I was not going to be stopping for any red lights if there was no opposing traffic. There's not a cop in the city who would have given me a ticket for that. One of the most extreme rule-breaking moments I've ever had was during a college road trip. We were driving through a remote part of the country when our old, beat-up car decided to give out. Stranded without cell service and not a soul in sight, we realized we were near a famed, but restricted scenic overlook. With no help coming and several hours to kill before the next town, we decided to jump the fence and explore the off-limits area. The view was breathtaking, stretching miles of untouched wilderness. As the sun set, the sky turned into a palette of vibrant colors, and the air was the freshest I'd ever breathed. It felt like standing on the edge of the world. Technically, we were trespassing, but in that moment, surrounded by such incredible beauty, the rules seemed trivial. It was an unforgettable experience that taught us sometimes the best memories are made when you color a little outside the lines. Definitely not that high stakes, but it was funny. A few years ago I was a broke college student living about 40 minutes from the university. I couldn't afford a dorm, but two of my buddies shared one. I spent all semester squatting in that dorm. All the dudes on our wing were cool with it, always let me in the building. The RA had no idea, just always said I was a guest. I slept on a mat under my friend's bed and used a dresser as my desk. The one friend went to study abroad after the first semester, so I signed up to stay in the room. The RA called me by his name because she thought I was the actual tenant the entire time. My stepdad was having a feud with the neighbors over trees, and it got to the point where it affected his health. Out of love for him, I wrote anonymous letters to the neighbors pretty much telling them to cool it and make peace. The fact that the letters were anonymous had them concerned that someone was threatening them. It was not my intent. A lawyer looked at a copy of the letter and said that nothing about it was threatening, but told me not to do it again, nor to reveal that I did it. The neighbors did not know who wrote the letter. When I was applying to UC schools, I completely disregarded whatever the essay prompt was. I insulted the prompt, and I can't even remember what I wrote about instead at this point. Ended up getting into Irvine, Santa Barbara, and Davis. A few decades ago, me the flakiest, most irresponsible version and a friend needed money to party over the weekend, but neither of us got paid until Monday. So I went to my bank right after it closed and deposited an empty envelope into the ATM, saying it was $300. I took out the max, probably $200 in cash. Then I called the bank in a panic and said, "Oh my God, I just accidentally deposited a blank envelope. What should I do?" The lady laughed a little and said, "Don't worry about it. You can take the check into the bank on Monday and get it cleared up, but you won't be able to use your ATM until you do." No problem. Everything went as planned. We partied. I went in on Monday and cleared it up. About a month later I did the same thing. This time, I never went back ever. A month later I saw in the paper the First Nationwide Savings was shutting down forever. Nothing ever came from the second deception. I used to work for a fast food and beverage chain, and I'd occasionally scan my loyalty card for customer orders, so I could get free food from all the points, only scanning a couple a week so it wouldn't look too suspicious. I didn't even really like the food, it just gave me a little thrill being on the wrong side of fast food law. Back then I knew it was breaking the rules, but I didn't realize until recently that companies can actually press charges for that. Teaching high school. A solid C student who is a good kid with not quite enough sense comes up to me after class. "Mr. DeRadius, I was fishing this morning and forgot I had this in my pocket. Wanted to do the right thing. Goes to hand me a pocket knife. The district has a zero-tolerance policy. It's unclear what will happen to this kid, depends on whether it has happened before, but it will be some pretty bad mojo. The last thing I want is for this kid to learn firsthand at this point in his life that doing the right thing will get you fed into the wheels of a terrible bureaucracy where you will then be ground into dust." So I tell him about the policy and what would happen to him if I weren't me. Then I put the knife in my own pocket, wondering to myself if he'll get fired if I'm caught with it, and give it back to him at the end of the day, with a statement along the lines of, "I never saw this, you're going to go straight home and never bring this back to school, and we're never going to speak of this again." Very, very rarely do I break or bend any rules or laws. I drive 5 miles under the speed limit. I felt guilty even doing this. But in this case, I could not in good conscience turn this kid in for doing what he was supposed to do. I wore my favorite shirt, and when someone told me I looked fat in it, I chose not to care.